This story starts with a water balloon. March 4th, 2026. It's Holi, the Hindu festival of colors, and a narrow lane in West Delhi is doing what Delhi lanes do on Holi. Color everywhere, music, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, a water balloon falls from a terrace and hits a Muslim woman below. That's the beginning. By the next morning, a 26-year-old man named Tarun Kumar is dead. Within days, 14 people from the Muslim community were arrested. Portions of an accused's home demolished without a court order. And 70 shops had their fronts bulldozed in an encroachment drive. Within a week, Muslim families who have lived in that colony for 50 years are quietly packing up and leaving. Here's what I want to understand. Not just what happened, but why this keeps happening. Not just in this colony, but in city after city, decade after decade, across India. Because this isn't a story about a water balloon. This is a story about a machine. A machine over 100 years old, built specifically to do exactly what happened in that lane. And to understand it, we need to go back. Not 10 years, not even 50, we need to go back to the beginning. But first, let's be honest about what we actually know about that evening. Because there are 5 different versions of this story and they contradict each other in important ways. Version 1. Tarun's family. A young girl accidentally dropped a water balloon from a terrace. It hit a Muslim woman below. The family apologized, but the woman gathered a mob, who came back with sticks and iron pipes. Tarun arrived at the scene and was beaten to death. Version 2. The accused family. A member named Shaheen says that the balloon wasn't thrown by a child. It was thrown by a 20-year-old man, and she says 4 drunk young men had been harassing her aunt, touching her without consent when her brother tried to intervene. A fight broke out. In this version, Tarun wasn't an innocent bystander. He was called to the scene and arrived on a motorcycle with 15 to 20 armed drunk associates. And here's the most explosive detail. Shaheen alleges that the fatal blow to Tarun's head came not from her family, but from his own associate, Arun, in the chaos of the brawl. Version 3. Police and local residents. These 2 families have known each other for 50 years.
इंक्वायरी के दौरान ये भी पता चला कि जैसे पड़ोसी के बीच में जो नॉर्मल होते रहते हैं इसमें कि पार्किंग को लेके झगड़ा, नॉट ए कम्युनल.
Version 4. Right-wing Hindu organizations. A targeted communal attack.
आए दिन ये हत्याएं होती है, लेकिन इन लोगों ने ये सोचा हुआ है एक मजबूत हिंदूवादी व्यक्ति हमें दिखेगा, हम उसे मारेंगे.
A jihadi attack.
और वे खून के आंसू इन जिहादियों को रुलाऊंगा, ये मेरा वादा है.
Retribution is required.
कि इन लोगों की नहीं ली जाए कोई गवाही और नहीं पहुंचने दी जाए इनको कोई कोर्ट, गोली रख के मारा जाए ऑन द स्पॉट. जय श्री राम.
Version 5. Civil rights groups. A neighborhood brawl deliberately communalized by political actors with all the legal and physical consequences falling on the Muslim community.
तो सांप्रदायिकता इस मारपीट की घटना में नहीं है. सांप्रदायिकता उसके बाद से शुरू होती है और वो सबसे पहले शुरू होती है सरकार की तरफ से और उसके बाद जो हिंदू सांप्रदायिक संगठन है उन सांप्रदायिक संगठनों की तरफ से.
So which version is true? We don't know yet. The criminal investigation is ongoing, and that's actually the point. None of what followed depended on knowing the truth. The machine doesn't need clarity to operate. It needs only 2 things: a violent dispute and a cross-community altercation. Before we get to the machine, we need to understand the place. JJ colonies are India's informal urban settlements, housing tens of millions of Delhi's working poor behind shared walls, in shared courtyards, around shared water taps. Resources are genuinely scarce, and when resources are scarce, conflict is constant. Not religious conflict, just conflict. Studies of communal violence consistently find the same thing. It's in these dense, pressured settlements that the match lights fastest. Not because people are more hateful, but because the friction is higher and the space is smaller. The same two families fight over parking on a Tuesday and sort it out. But if the right actors arrive with a different frame for what that fight was really about, everything changes. That's what happened in Hastasal colony. A resident who has lived there for over 50 years said, "All of us celebrate Holi, Eid, Diwali and visit each other's homes. What happened was unfortunate. 50 years of shared festivals overwritten in a week. How? By what? To answer that, we need to go back about a century." Here's the thing that surprises most people. The idea that Hindus and Muslims are ancient, irreconcilable civilizational enemies is not ancient. It's modern. It was built. In the late 1800s, the British began counting people by religion and tying political representation to those counts. Suddenly, your community's head count determined your power. For the first time, the precise size of the Muslim population was a matter of public record, and for Hindu elites operating in a system that tied representation to numbers, those numbers were alarming. A large Muslim population, newly visible, newly countable, was now legible as a political threat. This anxiety compounded a material reality already underway. The decline of Muslim rule and the consolidation of British power had drawn a new Hindu elite, educated, employed, advantaged by colonial institutions, while large sections of the Muslim population were being left behind economically. The census had made Muslims simultaneously threatening in number and vulnerable in circumstance, a combination that proved explosive. Religion and economic precarity were now fused into a single political category, and in that environment, riots started happening. Over a pig placed at a mosque, a cow slaughtered near a temple. These weren't ancient hatreds erupting, they were new political incentives. This template got refined over the decades, but in the early 20th century, it hit a fork in the road. On one path were nationalists who used Hindu identity to fight British colonialism. Tilak revived festivals like Ganesh Chaturthi not just as religious observances but as mass political gatherings. The enemy was the colonizer. And on the other, a different group who wanted to turn that same identity against Indian Muslims. Same tool, completely different target. This second path has a name and one central architect, Vinayak Damodar Savarkar. Militant Hindu nationalism had already been rising for decades in the Hindu Mahasabha, in the cow protection movements, in the riots. What Savarkar does in 1922, writing from a British prison, is to give its clearest articulation. His argument is simple and devastating. A true Indian, he says, is someone for whom India is both their fatherland and their holy land. Hindus, both. Sikhs, both. Buddhists, both. Muslims, their holy land is Makkah. Christians, Jerusalem. Therefore, Muslims and Christians cannot truly belong. They are guests in someone else's country. With one philosophical argument, he has made over 200 million Indian Muslims and Christians aliens in their own land. But the exclusion argument only works if it rests on a prior wound. And Savarkar supplies one. The Hindu civilization, he argues, was not merely a majority in its own land. It was a civilization that had been invaded, humiliated, and dispossessed. Centuries of Muslim rule meant temples destroyed, culture subordinated, the Hindu majority made strangers in their own home. This narrative of historical victimhood is the emotional engine of the entire project. It transforms exclusion into justice, aggression into restoration. You're not targeting a minority, you are reclaiming what was taken. The grievance is real enough to feel, ancient enough to be unfalsifiable, and useful enough to be deployed against every new incident. Historians have examined these claims carefully.
That temples are profoundly political institutions. It's where sovereign authority is established, reconfirmed, and contested. And this is a pattern that long precedes the arrival of Muslim Turks.
Medieval India was not a story of uniform religious persecution. Most rulers governed through accommodation, patronized temples, employed Hindu administrators. The destruction narrative is a selective reading of a mixed history, curated for political use. But victimhood narratives don't require the history to be accurate. They require it to be felt. Now, this needs an organization to carry it. And that's where the RSS comes in. The Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh is founded in 1925. Its second chief, M.S. Golwalkar, leads it for over 30 years and turns it from a fringe organization into a mass movement. Over 1 million members, dozens of affiliated groups, the network called the Sangh Parivar. Golwalkar's writing is not subtle. He says minorities have two choices: absorb entirely into Hindu culture or live at the majority's mercy. He looks at Nazi Germany's treatment of Jews and writes, admiringly, that it is a good lesson for us in Hindustan to learn. He is not writing a fantasy, he is writing an operational plan. The RSS is not a command and control structure, it's more like a franchisee. The RSS builds the ideology and trains the cadre. The BJP translates that into electoral power. The VHP and the Bajrang Dal are the street level units, the ones who show up in the neighborhoods after incidents like Holi. Nobody calls headquarters, the ideology is the instruction set. That's what makes it so hard to stop. Now we can talk about the machine. Political scientist Paul Brass spent decades studying communal violence in northern India and arrived at a conclusion as precise as it is disturbing. Large-scale Hindu-Muslim riots are not spontaneous, they are produced. They require what Brass calls an institutional riot system. There are specific roles. Informants alert political leaders when a sensitive incident occurs. Propagandists shape it into a message. Vernacular journalists publish that message as news. Poster plasterers put it on walls. Rumor mongers spread it by word of mouth. Recruiters gather the crowds and wait for the signal. Two roles are pivotal here. One, the fire tender works between riots, keeping communal grievances warm, surfacing real or fabricated flashpoints so animosities never fully cool. And two, the conversion specialist is the trigger. He takes a local incident and reframes it as a communal attack requiring response. Now add a layer Brass couldn't fully account for in the 1990s, the media infrastructure. Today, narrative reframing travels by WhatsApp to locality, city, and national groups in minutes. Local cable news picks it up within hours. IT cells boost it nationally by nightfall. By the time a journalist records this isn't a communal issue, the counter-narrative is reaching a fraction of the audience the original frame has already reached. The speed of the amplification infrastructure is itself a weapon. Here is the method. Step by step. Find a fracture. You don't invent the spark. You just need to be ready when it happens. Reinterpret. Assign a communal frame. The vocabulary is preloaded.
में बांट दिया, हमें वोटों में बांट दिया, हम हिंदू अलग अलग हो गए, लेकिन हिंदू अलग नहीं हुआ है, अब हिंदू एक हो गया.
Then mobilize outside actors. Show up within hours. Plant flags. Push the people who actually live there out of the frame. And then amplify. The narrative reaches 100 times more people than any correction can. Then activate the state asymmetrically. This is where the machine becomes most dangerous. Let's go back to Hastasal colony. 14 people from the Muslim community are arrested. That's expected. There's a death, there are accused, and there's a criminal investigation. That is how law enforcement is supposed to work. But then, a mob chanting Jai Shri Ram enters an accused's home in front of police and vandalizes it. The police don't intervene, and then the bulldozers. March 8th, portions of an accused's home demolished. No court order, no conviction, no trial. March 14th, 70 shops sealed and demolished. This didn't happen in a political vacuum. Since Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath pioneered bulldozer action in Uttar Pradesh spectacularly, Publicly, with television cameras invited to watch, it has been replicated as an explicit post-communal punishment tool across BJP-governed states. The bulldozer has become a political symbol, the state as avenger before any court has spoken.
दिल्ली में एनकाउंटर लागू करो, दिल्ली में बुलडोजर कार्रवाई करो, लेकिन बुलडोजर कार्रवाई ऐसे नहीं चाहिए तो 3 छज्जा गिरा के अब चुप हो जाओ. दिल्ली में जोगी जैसा बुलडोजर कार्रवाई शुरू करो.
I want to be fair to the government's argument. These are illegal structures on public land. The municipal authority has both the right and the obligation to remove encroachments. And that's not entirely wrong. But here is what it leaves out. Jhuggi Jhopdi colonies don't exist by accident. The state tolerates them for decades because they supply cheap labor. And when the land underneath them becomes valuable enough for a corporate project, a road, a redevelopment scheme, the state demolishes them in the name of encroachment, or beautification, or public interest. Urban researchers have documented for decades that even before Hindutva, these drives fell disproportionately on Muslim neighborhoods and Dalit and lower caste settlements. The communities with the least political capital, the least legal documentation, the least access to the courts. The encroachment law was already doing quiet, discriminatory work. And here is what makes it so effective as a weapon. Because informal property is structurally pervasive across Indian cities, almost any home, shop or wall in a JJ colony is legally exposed if someone chooses to live. The loophole is not the exception, it is the condition of urban life for tens of millions of people. What has changed is that it is now openly deployed against Muslims in the specific aftermath of communal incidents. The selective has become the declared. Now, 3 reasons this is still an injustice. 1. Timing. These violations existed before March 4th. The political demand for bulldozer action was made publicly.
हमारी तो पूरे हिंदुत्व सनातन धर्म की सिर्फ 2 डिमांड है. पहला तो एनकाउंटर, दूसरा दिल्ली में योगी मॉडल.
Enforcement followed within 96 hours, specifically against Muslim structures.
ये सबसे अच्छा करवाया है, बहुत अच्छा करवाया है उन्होंने. उनको डर तो होना चाहिए, तो कल को कुछ आगे को कुछ करने से पहले सोचेंगे कि मतलब हिंदू परिवार क्या कर सकता है.
Timing is not incidental, it is the message. The Supreme Court in 2024 ruled it unconstitutional. No demolition without notice, a documented hearing, a written order, a real opportunity for legal recourse. Now third, who benefits from this? Those 70 shops were the economic spine of the Muslim majority section of the colony. Demolish them and you disrupt livelihoods. Clear commercially valuable land and make a statement about whose presence in that neighborhood is permanent and whose is contingent. The material and political incentives are perfectly aligned. The message is not legal, it is territorial. Your presence here is conditional, all of it revocable. Then the machine's final step activates without anyone giving an order. Step 6. The Exodus. Muslim families in Hastasal look at what's happened in the last week. Neighbors arrested, shops demolished, colony covered in saffron flags. A public rally where a speaker said, and faced no arrest. The threat was made in public, on camera. The state did not move. Notice what this means for what comes next. If violence happens at Eid, the machinery gets what it demanded. Another incident, another cycle, another round of arrests and demolitions and flags. And if Eid passes quietly, a different machinery activates. The BJP was not Hindu enough. Muslims were appeased. The state failed to protect Hindus. The movement must go further. Either outcome moves the floor. Either outcome shifts the public conversation rightward. The machine is not gambling on a particular result. It has designed a situation where every result advances the project. The ratchet only turns one way, and the Muslims leave. Not because they were ordered out, because they read the situation correctly. The state has demonstrated it will not protect them. The cost of staying is now higher than the cost of leaving. The neighborhood slowly homogenizes. The constitutional right to live where you choose quietly erased. Hastasal colony in 2026 is not an isolated incident. It is one instance of a pattern. In every case that follows this template, certain things are constant. A mundane initial incident with a disputed account, outside organizational actors arriving within 24 to 48 hours, the narrative shift from personal to civilizational, asymmetric state response, Muslims arrested, Hindu perpetrators largely uncharged, demolitions or displacement of Muslim property, incitement speeches with no legal consequence, and over months, demographic shift in the affected locality. What varies is scale, speed of judicial intervention, and media coverage, because national attention tends to produce faster court intervention. The 2002 Gujarat pogrom is the most extensively documented case. Over 1,000 Muslims killed, tens of thousands displaced. Investigators documented that state officials were involved.
Since February, the Muslims of Gujarat have been the target of unprecedented brutality, often at the hands of those who are meant to protect them, the police.
Hundreds and hundreds of places of worship, mosques and dargahs were destroyed. Some of them were destroyed not by fire, but by bulldozer, and a road was built overnight. Could this be done without state enterprise?
The Chief Minister of Gujarat during those riots became the Prime Minister in 2014. The 2020 Delhi riots, 53 killed, predominantly Muslim, were preceded by open threats. BJP leader Kapil Mishra said,
हमारे सामने खड़े हैं, मैं आप सबके बिहाफ पे ये बात कह रहा हूँ, ट्रंप के जाने तक तो हम शांति से जा रहे हैं, लेकिन उसके बाद हम आपकी भी नहीं सुनेंगे अगर रास्ते खाली नहीं हुए तो.
Violence began within hours. I want to say this carefully. Not every incident like this is manufactured from scratch. Some conflicts do involve genuine hostility. The machine's genius is not that it invents conflict. It's that it processes existing conflict. The friction in Hastasal was real. 6 decades of disputes, genuine scarcity, a brawl that turned fatal. The machine just needs to pick it up, reframe it, and attach it to a pre-existing story about civilizational war. That's what makes the frame credible. The anger is real. The loss Tarun Kumar's family experienced is real. The machine just reroutes where that anger gets directed. This is also why the reinterpretation step works so fast. A brawl over a water balloon doesn't need to be explained as a communal attack. It only needs to be named as one. The audience already knows the rest of the story. They learned it long before March 4th on their WhatsApp groups, on their YouTube channels, and on their Instagram stories. I want to try to understand the people who believed this. Not the organizers, but the ordinary residents of JJ colonies across India who, when men arrive with saffron flags and a story about civilizational war, find that story compelling. Because the narrative the Sangh Parivar offers that Hindus are under demographic threat.
हिंदू खतरे में ही है, संख्या हिंदू की घट रही है, वो 6 से 22% पहुंचने की कगार पर है और हम 90 से 80 के नीचे आ गए.
That love jihad is converting Hindu women.
Love jihad is a reality. Islamist radicalization is a reality.
Muslims are planning to outnumber and overwhelm Hindus.
भारत के सनातन को खत्म करने की एक साजिश भी.
This narrative is empirically false. India's Muslim population growth rate is now nearly equal to the Hindu rate. There is no evidence of an organized conversion conspiracy, and the demographic replacement claim is a global template of the far right.
Great replacement. Now, that is a French homegrown theory.
In the simplest of terms, it's the idea that there is some master plan to diminish white power.
But it correctly names genuine anxiety. You live in a JJ colony, water pressure is unreliable, your kids compete for government jobs against thousands of applicants. The city is changing around you and none of it feels controllable. And someone arrives and says, this is happening to you because of them. That's the offer. You're not a struggling daily wage worker. You're a Hindu defending a civilization. And not just any civilization, a wounded one that was great, then conquered, then humiliated across centuries of Muslim rule, then straightened into a colonial framework that benefited everyone but you. Your precarity today is not random misfortune. It is the last chapter of a very long story of dispossession. And Muslims living beside you in the same colony, competing for the same jobs, using the same water tap, are not your neighbors in a shared predicament. They are the continuation of that story. Your struggle has meaning, enemies, and a community that will show up for you. This is why Tarun Kumar's Dalit identity matters. Dalits occupy the same economic tier as their Muslim neighbors, compete for the same resources, and sometimes have their own grievances. The Sangh Parivar doesn't invent this tension, it finds it and then makes its offer. Don't be a Dalit fighting caste oppression. Be a Hindu with the protection of the majority.
आज तरुण की लड़ाई कौन लड़ रहा है? तरुण की लड़ाई पूरा हिंदू समाज मिलकर के लड़ रहा है. जिस समाज से वो आता है उसके साथ वो समाज नहीं खड़ा हुआ.
Scholars call this subaltern Hindutva, absorbing Dalit anger into a majoritarian project, redirecting it outward instead of upward. What it doesn't say that the Sangh's founders celebrated a hierarchy that always put Dalits at the bottom, that the protection evaporates the moment Dalits assert their own political interests, that the Ambedkarite tradition is a direct alternative to this offer. Here's one of the most important things to understand about what's happening in India right now. The constitution doesn't need to be rewritten for this project to succeed. Drafted under B.R. Ambedkar's leadership in the immediate shadow of the partition, it guaranteed equal citizenship regardless of religion, the right to live where you choose, protection from arbitrary punishment, freedom of conscience, written specifically to prevent India from becoming what Golwalkar wanted. But you don't need to overturn the constitution to make it irrelevant. Two things are happening simultaneously, and to understand what is new, you need to understand what is not. The first is a gap between what the constitution says and what people experience. This gap is not new. Under Congress-era secular nationalism, Muslims faced discrimination in housing, policing, and employment. Riots produced the same asymmetric state response, the same impunity. The secular republic never fully delivered on its constitutional promise to its Muslim citizens. What is new is not the gap, but its intensity, its explicitness, and the disappearance of any formal embarrassment about it. The second process is more fundamental, and unlike the gap, it has no precedent in the secular era. The constitution recognized Muslim personal law, Hindu personal law, the rights of religious communities to govern their own affairs and personal matters. It placed the Uniform Civil Code as a future aspiration, a directive principle, deliberately unresolved because the framers could not reconcile the tension between equality and religious autonomy in 1950 and chose not to force the question. Congress worked within that tension, however imperfectly. What is happening now is different in kind. Constitutional provisions are being reinterpreted through a Hindu civilizational lens so that a framework of deliberately held tensions becomes a hierarchy. And the frame doing the rewriting is not constitutional secularism, it is Hindu civilizational primacy. The longer-term architecture of the legal constraint, the Disturbed Areas Act, restricting property sales in designated neighborhoods used in Gujarat in ways that entrench segregation rather than prevent it. A community that can't sell its property in a mixed neighborhood is trapped. A community that can't buy property in a new area is excluded. The CAA goes further. It encodes religious discrimination into citizenship law directly for the first time in the Republic's history, in explicit violation of Articles 14 and 15. A departure from constitutional logic written into statute. Counter-terrorism laws applied asymmetrically against Muslim activists complete the picture. Accounting without a single constitutional amendment, without anything that looks in isolation like discrimination, to the gradual practical reduction of Muslim citizenship. But the constraint architecture is only the surface. Beneath it, the deliberate tensions the framers built into the constitution are being resolved by force in one direction. The UCC as a directive principle since 1950 was always an aspiration toward eventual consensus. What is being pushed now is categorically different.
संविधान में freedom of religion fundamental right है. संविधान में जो प्रियम्बल है उसमें लिबर्टी ऑफ थॉट, इक्वालिटी एंड जस्टिस की बात की गई है. तो ये यूसीसी के नाम पर सिर्फ हिंदू कोड बिल को लागू करना चाहते हैं जो सरासर गलत है, अनकॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल है.
The constitution is being reread, word by word, until its secular commitments mean something else entirely. I want to be careful here. Historical comparisons can obscure as much as they illuminate. India in 2026 is not Germany in 1938. The constitutional protections, while eroded, still exist. Courts still sometimes intervene. Civil society still functions. This comparison must not be used to flatten the tragedy of what happened in Europe or declare India's fate sealed. But the structural parallels are real. The scapegoated minority framed as an internal civilizational threat, legal and bureaucratic mechanisms used alongside extra-legal violence, the gradual erosion of practical citizenship while formal equality is preserved, the normalization through repetition, through impunity of what were initially shocking acts. What connects these cases is a single logic, the claim that a civilization belongs to one people alone, that others living within it are guests at best and threats at worst. This logic has appeared in different forms across the 20th and 21st centuries. Its consequences have been consistent. History teaches this. The logic of ethnic and religious closure does not deliver what it promises. It promises civilizational glory. It produces civilizational self-destruction. Nazi Germany did not produce a flowering of German civilization. It produced ruins and a permanent stain on a nation's name. The Jewish people survived the Holocaust, and from that survival built both a moral vocabulary and a political project. The Nuremberg Principles, the Genocide Convention, crimes against humanity, these emerged from what was done to Jews in Europe, and then Gaza.
I find that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the threshold indicating the commission of the crime of genocide against Palestinians as a group in Gaza has been met.
What is happening there represents a particular kind of tragedy, a people who survived history's worst atrocity reproducing its defining logic against another people. The moral authority that survival grants is being consumed by the conduct it was supposed to prevent. Victimhood does not inoculate against perpetration. Modi's visit to Israel in February 2026, only his second, 9 years after the first, was not incidental. He addressed the Knesset, the first Indian Prime Minister to do so, and declared,
India stands with Israel firmly, with full conviction in this moment and beyond.
He visited Yad Vashem, the Holocaust memorial. He said nothing about Gaza. The US-Israel strikes on Iran began less than 48 hours after he left. India is now Israel's largest arms buyer. The RSS has long looked at Zionism with ideological sympathy.
Hindu nationalism and Zionism kind of waltz together very, very easily, you know. If you think you're the chosen people, within Hinduism is the caste system where Brahmins are the chosen people. So the segue into that sort of fascist thinking is not a hard one to me.
If a people can build an ethno-religious state and defend it by force, so can Hindus. The founding fathers of Hindutva admired Nazi Germany. Their successor's prime minister laid a wreath at the memorial to Nazi Germany's victims, embraced a leader wanted by the International Criminal Court, and flew home as the bombs began to fall. The logic connecting these moments is the consistent thread of ethnic and religious nationalism, followed wherever it leads. A movement claiming to defend Hindu civilizational glory by these method is not protecting a civilization. It is submitting to the same forces that have already produced ruins once and are producing them again. So let me bring this all the way back. A water balloon, a fight, a death. A machine refined over 100 years activates within hours. It finds the fracture, real, pre-existing, and widens it. Reinterprets the event through a narrative of civilizational injury that was constructed in a British prison in 1922 and has been kept warm ever since. mobilizes outside actors, amplifies through WhatsApp and local TV before any journalist can get a correction out, deploys the bulldozer, normalized across BJP-governed states, demanded delivered within the week, and then waits for fear to do the rest of the work. Families who have lived there for 50 years quietly, rationally leave. A neighborhood that was mixed is being demographically reshaped just by accumulated weight of arrests, demolitions, flags, and speeches that went unanswered by law. That's the machine. Now here's the question I keep coming back to. When you understand it, when you can see it operating, name its parts, trace its ideology to the men who built it, and trace their inspirations to the regimes that preceded them, what do you do with that knowledge? The machine depends on ordinary people accepting the frame it offers. On the Dalit worker in a JJ colony, believing his precarity is a chapter in a civilizational story rather than a political economy that has always exploited him. On the story of ancient Hindu victimhood being more legible than the colonial census that made it politically useful. On the story of civilizational war being more legible than 50 years of shared festivals. And on those of us watching from a distance, treating each incident as isolated, as local, as someone else's problem. It isn't. This video was recorded while the machine was still running. By the time you watch it, the ratchet will have turned again. That is not a reason to wait before understanding it. It is the reason to understand.